It was an accident like no other, exposing the dangers of overloading trains. So many people dying in such a violent collision. The worst in all of Indonesia, and the second worst in all of Oceanian countries. This is the tragic tale of the 1987 Bintaro Tragedy. October 19th, 1987. PJKA, the Indonesian railway operator, is running two trains on the West Java Rail network, specifically the line from Jakarta to Cilegon. These trains are both passenger services, being hauled by Henschel DHG 800BB locomotives, classified as BB306 class engines. These trains are heading in opposite directions towards each other. Service KA225 is heading from Serpong Station towards Jakarta, while the other service, KA220, from Tanah Abang Station away from Jakarta and towards its next stop, Kabanyolan, being led by BB306 number 16 with 7 coaches. Now, between these stations, there is Sudimara Station. It's worth mentioning that this rail line, at the time, only had one track. Now, this would be no problem, as Sudimara had 3, if they weren't all full. Platform 1 was already reserved for KA225, Platform 2 had a cement train, and Platform 3 had a rake of coaches with no locomotive. At 6:45 am, KA220 arrives into Kabanyolan, and KA225 arrives at Sudimara. Now, here is where the biggest problem for this rail network lies: overcrowding. At this point in time, people roof riding, clinging onto sides, and even onto the locomotive were common sights, and still are in some other countries like Bangladesh. This was a time that it occurred. People crowded onto the locomotive of KA225, meaning that the driver couldn't actually see the line ahead, nor its signal. Now, because Sudimara was full, they had arranged to get both trains to pass at a crossing loop between Kabanyolan and Molak, giving KA220 lower priority. The station master wanted to move KA225 to another siding, however this was misinterpreted as just proceeding forward. At this time, KA220 started to leave for Sudimara. Now, this would be safe if the driver understood the station master's instructions. However, the signal in front of him was set to danger, so he couldn't move anyway. If he could see it. The driver asked one of the riders on the loco if the signal is set to proceed. Thing is, the riders don't know what the signals meant, so wanting to get their destination quickly, they just said to proceed. The driver complies, sending both trains on the same track at the same time. Station master sees this and chases after the train with a red flag. At the same time, KA220 leaves its station calmly. A couple seconds after this all happened, Sudimara's yardmaster chased after KA225 with a motorbike. Back at the station, a switcher boarded the train as it left to try and stop it, but the crowd makes it impossible to get to the locomotive. The station master runs out of breath and gives up, so he slumps his way back to the station to try and radio to a level crossing operator nearby both trains to try and stop them, but it's too late. There was no way to stop the collision by now. Both trains approach the town of Bintaro, where all hell breaks loose. The trains violently smash into each other. The coaches telescope through each other, covering both locomotives. 139 people were killed and 254 were injured. The cars weren't straight around a crash site, they stayed straight and morphed into one gory linear straight line. Due to the sheer force of the crash, as well as the huge crowd, people in the undamaged carriages were still greatly injured, with some dying. The recovery process took several weeks, non-stop. This crash was the worst in Indonesia, and because Indonesia owns West Papua, it is technically the second worst train disaster in all of Oceania, beating out the Granville disaster and falling short of the Tangier disaster in New Zealand. But how could such a devastating collision just happen out of nowhere? Many speculate that most of the deaths were caused by the sheer overcrowding. Tons of far more destructive accidents have occurred, but have had minimal deaths or injuries, simply because there just aren't enough people to be killed. Now, you could blame this on Indonesia's large population, or you could blame this on the limited train services caused by there only being a one track. Duplication would have eliminated all chance of this crash occurring. The driver of KA225 somehow survived the crash and was blamed for it. He himself thought that it was unfair, as he was just following the station master's orders, albeit misunderstood. He received a jail sentence of 5 years, losing pension despite working for the rail network for 20. Upon release, he would go to his hometown of Purworejo in central Java and is now a cigarette seller. It is unknown if he is still living. KA225's conductor was sentenced for 2 years and 6 months in prison. The Kebaniolan station master received 10 months in prison. In the end, both locomotives and one of the telescope coaches were deemed damaged beyond repair and were scrapped. Somehow, all other wagons were returned to service. PJKA is now known as Kereta API Indonesia, also known as KAI. The signals on the network were known as semaphore signals. These were not only obsolete by the rest of the world's standards, but they were also only able to decipher if you either knew a lot about trains or were a railway employee. Modern colour light signals are far more similar to regular road intersection lights, with clear, easy to understand colours. Some people say that the lessons of Bintaro haven't been learnt. In 2016, the Andrea Corato train collision took place in the Apulia region of Italy. The railway Ferrotramviaria, operating the Bari-Barletta rail line, experienced this disaster with 23 deaths and 54 injuries. A lot of factors for this collision were very similar to Bintaro. In 2013, another train crash would happen in the same place in Bintaro days. The 2013 Bintaro collision occurred at the level crossing when a KRL commuter line train crashed into a PT Pertamina petroleum tanker, causing a carriage to keel over and burst into flames, killing 7 people and injuring 63. Nowadays, overcrowding trains is still a big issue. However, it is declining steadily with the advent of more trains, more tracks, and more electrification. Roof riding has now become much more of a rarity worldwide, with countries like India imposing strict punishments. Hopefully, we will never see an accident like this again.